Hello everyone, Charcoal here, and at long last, welcome back to Thomas and Friends. Over a year ago, I talked about the Model Series, seasons 1 through 12. We went over Thomas's conception and his journey from a show with immeasurable heart and soul put into it to a cash grab show for toddlers. I highly recommend going back to watch that video if you haven't already. A lot of work went into it, and I'm very proud of it. And now we're talking about the CGI series, which can be divided into three distinct eras. The Nitrogen Era, seasons 13 through 16, the Brenner Era, seasons 17 through 21, and Big World Big Adventures, seasons 22 through 24. The CGI series is also home to the majority of the Thomas movies, 11 out of the 14 total, but I won't be reviewing them here. The movies will very likely be a separate video or pair of videos sometime down the road. Anyway, when we left off with season 12, the show was at its lowest point so far. The other hit seasons had good episodes here and there, but season 12 had none. All of them were very formulaic and boring. Let's see if anything improved with the transition to CGI. 2009 saw the release of the movie Hero of the Rails. It was originally planned to be a model CGI hybrid movie like season 12, as were the following seasons, but at some point someone just made the decision to go full CGI provided by Nitrogen Studios with a full voice cast. Hero of the Rails was actually pretty good, and it set high expectations for the seasons following. And then season 13 came out, and everyone's hopes were dashed, thrown in the garbage, and set on fire. What even is there to say about the Nitrogen seasons? I don't know if I can even bother going through each season individually because they're all the same. Every episode goes like this. On the island of Sodor, all the engines liked doing work on the Fat Controller's railway. One day, main character was at a place. Sir Topham had arrived. Main character, here is a special job for you. Please do it correctly. But main character wasn't listening and or had another idea. They went to do their job and made a mistake, but they took no notice. I'm sure I can still do my idea. Main character continued and made a second mistake, but they took no notice. I'm sure I can still do my idea. Then there was trouble. Main character made a third mistake and everything was ruined. Bother, I can't do my idea. How silly I am. So main character went back and fixed their mistakes and did their job correctly, and everyone smiled. Every single episode across all 4 Nitrogen seasons follows this 3-strike formula. And as a result, all of them feel extremely boring because nothing ever happens, besides of course introducing a new character or two every season to sell toys. Even the best or least bad episodes are concepts that could have worked if they had more thought put into them, but are still incredibly dull in execution. Episodes like Edward the Hero and Happy Birthday Sir. A very slight positive about the writing is that the cast in some of these episodes are pretty varied, with a lot of character interactions you wouldn't expect. But that's just because everyone is a mindless drone in service to the narrator, making them so interchangeable you may as well pull names out of a hat. This run of seasons is also commonly called the Miller Era, named after the head writer Sharon Miller. She'd been working on the show since season 9, and now she was writing half the episodes every season, or at least having a major voice in anything she didn't write. A lot of fans blame her for Thomas's downgrade into a baby show, and I can't say I disagree. I should mention the animation here because it's actually pretty good, especially for the time these seasons came out. The CGI models all look dead on perfect with their physical counterparts, the characters move like they have weight to them most of the time, and every so often Nitrogen would treat us to a shot that wouldn't have been possible with the old models. That and most of the voices they chose are very good. The main problem with this era was the writing, which had no effort put into it whatsoever. And that really stung because everyone else seemed to be actually trying. A lot of people call this Thomas's worst era, but I disagree. It was definitely terrible, don't get me wrong, and it was the worst at the time it came out, but now we have the hindsight to see that it also wasn't nearly as bad as it could have been. Trust me, it got so much worse. 2012 saw the release of the final Nitrogen season and the final Hit Entertainment season as a whole, season 16. That same year, Hit was bought out by the toy company Mattel, and they would shake things up massively. Nitrogen's contract was up, so the new animation studio became Arc Productions. Along with that, they brought in a brand new writing team. Sharon Miller was gone, and taking her place would be the new head writer, Andrew Brenner. The Brenner Era is widely considered to be Thomas's big comeback, and for good reason. It was clear that Andrew Brenner and the new writing team really wanted to get the show back on its feet, starting with the 2013 movie King of the Railway. It wasn't great, but it did show a lot of promise. It's also worth noting there was a change in narration here. Michael Angelis, the UK narrator since season 3, and Michael Brandon, the US narrator since season 7, finally took their leave from the show after the Mattel buyout and were replaced in both dubs by Mark Morahan, who remained narrator through season Season 21. Season 17 came out following King of the Railway, and it was genuinely the first solid season in a decade, trumping all of 8 through 16 in my opinion. The three-strike formula started to disappear, and the episodes became much more character-driven. Speaking of characters, a lot of old faces who disappeared during the Nitrogen era made a return this season, like Duck, Bill and Ben, and Harvey. It was far from perfect. There were a good handful of episodes that still felt very formulaic and gimmicky, but it was a very noticeable improvement over the previous seasons. Season 18 continued that trend, giving us a lot of banger episodes, more so than 17, and fan favorites like Duncan and Oliver joined the list of returning characters. There were still a handful of duds, and a lot of characters hit entertainment personalities carried over from the previous seasons, like Toby suddenly being scared of Knapford Junction for some reason. But Season 18 was still a very good season overall, much better than 17. I can't say the same about Season 19 though. It's mostly really good episodes, if not great, but the bad episodes are just awful. It really stung seeing such a polarizing season come out right in between the two best movies the show has ever seen for the franchise's 70th anniversary. This was where it became apparent that Thomas being a status quo show wasn't going anywhere. This is more of an issue with the Brenner seasons as a whole, not just season 19. Most of the characters stuck to a single defining trait, and that was it. Most characters. Thomas, on the other hand, became more inconsistent than ever. His personality would vary wildly from episode to episode. Sometimes he was the childish idiot getting himself into stupid situations. Sometimes he was the responsible voice of reason. Nobody seemed to know who Thomas was anymore, and he basically became whatever each episode's plot needed him to be. Granted, these were problems with all the seasons under Hit's ownership and having its roots as far back as season 6, but in this new era where it was so apparent that the team behind the show genuinely cared, the fact these characters' development never sticks is even more irritating. But pretty much all my complaints about this era were dashed by season 20. I'm definitely not alone when I say season 20 is the best CGI season, no question. I would even say it's the best one since season 5. Every episode this season, save maybe 3 or 4 of them, is fantastic. Newer characters like Ryan, Skiff, and Glynn all got fleshed out, returning ones like Daisy, Donald, and Douglas got episodes all to themselves, and we got the first adaptations of the Railway series books since season 4, featuring the miniature Arlesdale engines. Plus, the animation hit its peak this season, and we got an all-new composer, Chris Renshaw, who I really like. I don't know what else to say. Season 20 is amazing. They went all out with this batch of episodes. It really felt like a celebration of everything that came before it. The true 70th anniversary season. Before I move on to season 21, we need to talk about something called corporate meddling. When Mattel bought the franchise, they seemed to be mostly hands-off with the actual show, and the show became good again because they brought in people to make it who happened to actually give a shit about quality. But behind the scenes, sales were slipping. Thomas was quickly losing profits because Mattel's inaction and lack of care led to extremely poor marketing, so the show barely got any exposure, and cutting corners on merchandise. The only reason Thomas lasted so long was because of toys, so when crap like this appeared on shelves, of course kids didn't like it. Why would they buy something that was an objective downgrade from what they had before? But Mattel immediately blamed their losses on the show itself. They almost canceled the show after season 20. That's why the crew put everything they had into that season, because there was a very real possibility it would be the last. But Mattel came up with a new plan, a plan to rebrand Thomas and bring it into the modern age. Season 21 was meant to lay the stepping stones, but this thing went through production hell. In 2015, ARC Productions found themselves suddenly having to animate The Adventure Begins along with season 19 and the usual 2015 movie Sodor's Legend of the Lost Treasure. Then, during production of season 20 in 2016, ARC went bankrupt and was bought out by Jam-Filled Toronto. Between the animators already having to play catch-up, plus the bankruptcy, plus Mattel suddenly gearing up for the rebrand, something in 2017 had to be cut. So when season 21 released, it ended up only being 18 episodes instead of the usual 26. Some of the cut episodes were reused for seasons 22 and 23, while others never saw the light of day again. I'm honestly mixed on this season. There are a lot of good episodes, but this was where the show started to venture into more cartoony territory. And then there was the infamous episode, A Shed for Edward, where Edward, the original Thomas character, was officially written out of the main cast in preparation for the 2018 rebrand. With that one glaring exception though, I think season 21 is still decent on its own. The Brenner era was far from perfect, but it was the best group of seasons we'd gotten in years. There was a huge amount of care and respect for the series' roots here, and the new team was able to finally make Thomas good again. Unfortunately, this era would also be the last good seasons we ever got. I've delayed this long enough. It's time we talk about Mattel's new plan for Thomas, Big World, Big Adventures. Putting it lightly, Big World, Big Adventures was the biggest mistake this franchise ever made. Suddenly, half the episodes didn't even take place on Sodor, instead having Thomas go to other countries for no explicable reason other than Mattel wanting to market the show to those countries. They made such a big deal about being more inclusive and diverse, but then they turn around and only show the most stereotypical things possible about whatever country Thomas visits. Everyone in China does Tai Chi, India is full of animals, Australia is one huge wasteland. With this being Jamfield's first time building new sets for the show all on their own, they really showed that they can't animate for crap. Every country set is so barren, and the lighting is extremely harsh. In the transition from Nitrogen to Arc Productions, everything became more vibrant and colorful in a very pleasant way, but Jamfield's animation is sickeningly colorful. On top of that, every episode includes a pointless, wacky fantasy sequence, and the laws of physics in general seem to be completely optional now. Another part of the rebrand was getting rid of two main characters and replacing them with new female characters. We got rid of Edward in Season 21, and the second episode of Season 22, Forever and Ever, saw the departure of Henry. Two of Wilbert Audrey's original three characters gone, just like that, and they basically never appeared again. Forever and Ever is, in my opinion, the worst episode of the entire show across all 24 seasons. It's not even for the fact they wrote off Henry in 2 seconds, but how they portray Gordon's reaction. Gordon throws a full-on hissy fit like a freaking toddler, and the whole episode feels like one big intentional you to all the fans watching, telling us to sit down, shut up, and accept all the changes Mattel was making. The new female characters were Nia and Rebecca. Nia is from Africa. I don't know what else you want me to say, that's literally her only defining trait. And Rebecca sure does exist. Both of them have about as much depth as cardboard. Let me be clear, there is nothing wrong with gender equality or diversity in kids shows. Thomas has plenty of female characters, most of whom are very developed and fun to watch. Even diverse characters are nothing new to Thomas. Just look at Hiro and Victor. Everybody loves them because they have more going on than the fact that Hiro is from Japan or Victor is from Cuba. The problem starts when you make that the only thing they have going for them, and Nia and Rebecca have no defined personalities beyond that. These two did not warrant replacing Edward and Henry whatsoever. I'm not even going to bother going over each season. They all blend together and get progressively worse. Realism kept getting thrown out the window, and by season 24, we literally had flying cars. Not just in fantasy sequences, this is in the canon reality of the show. And need I remind you that this is the same season as a special that features a middle-aged Queen Elizabeth and a child Prince Charles. Speaking of which, the good episodes, because surprisingly, there are a few hidden gems here. The episodes written by Michael White, while not all of them are hits, are really the only ones worth watching. They feel like they were written by the one guy who actually still gave a shit. But a few good episodes are not enough to save this era. I'm just gonna say it. Big World, Big Adventures was the worst run of seasons this show has ever seen. I mentioned earlier that the Nitrogen seasons were terrible, but at the very least, those seasons never really strayed away from the show's core appeal, trains doing train things in a semi-realistic setting. That's not the case here. Mattel would rather make Thomas literally anything but a train, and Mattel definitely felt the pinch of this misstep because seasons 22 through 24 basically killed what little profitability Thomas had left. This is no longer Thomas, plain and simple. But I held out hope. I cling to the hope that if Thomas could be pulled out of a rough spot once, it could happen again. So I kept watching the show. When season 24 wrapped up in fall 2020, it concluded with the 75th anniversary special, where Thomas and Sir Topham Hatt go to London and meet the Queen. It was a really nice special, but little did we know it would end up being the series finale. No season 25 had been greenlit, but a month or two later, that changed. I was on the fandom wiki page for season 24 and noticed there was finally a button to scroll ahead to season 25. So I clicked it, and what I saw was this. I am not exaggerating when I say I was too shocked to speak. It wouldn't end up being season 25. Thomas and Friends was officially over with season 24. This was the 2021 reboot, Thomas and Friends All Engines Go. This garbage is the show now. Mattel has dumbed Thomas down to the exact same mindless crap as all of its competitors. And that's why I'm not going to give this new series the light of day. Again, this isn't Thomas and Friends, this is All Engines Go. And if it's not trying to do anything unique to stand out, and it's disrespecting the franchise's roots on every level, then I don't see why I should bother giving this thing any of my time. I did watch a few episodes out of sheer curiosity, and I never want to touch this pile of trash again. The CGI series was turbulent to say the least. The show sank even lower than the model series had left it, but then Andrew Brenner and his team gave us hope again, only for Big Daddy Mattel to step in and shoot Thomas right in the goddamn face, and then kick him a few times for good measure. Rest in peace, Thomas, but at least there's nothing Mattel can do to you that'll take away all the fond memories that keep this fandom alive. The people who actually care about this little blue tank engine and his legacy will continue to uphold it across the internet, myself included. But with that, we've reached the end. This has been the story of Thomas the Tank Engine and friends. Thank you for visiting Charcoal's Den, and I'll see you all in the next video.